Today, our speakers are myself. Again, I'm Jacob Hickman in the Department of Anthropology, as well as Manman, one of my collaborators. So I'm gonna, just to give you a couple of quick notes about Manman. So our collaboration actually came about while I was on a Fulbright fellowship in China, in Yunnan province, being hosted by the Yunnan University, which is actually one of the centers for visual anthropology research in China. So Manman and I both met at an ethnographic film training seminar and festival. And she's a filmmaker. So she has a master's degree in film study from the Beijing Film Academy in 2015. And currently she's doing a master's degree in the University of Applied Sciences in Berlin. I'll spare you trying to pronounce the German version of it, but that's a program that started with the Free University of Berlin and is transferred over. So she's currently doing a master's degree in visual anthropology. So our collaboration, we came together because I was coming at an interest in visual anthropology very much from a traditional ethnographic approach, and Manman was coming at anthropology from a filmmaking approach. And given that we wanted to sort of draw from each other's strengths, my deeper grounding in anthropology and her much deeper grounding in filmmaking, we kind of came together to produce the major piece that we're going to be watching today. And so Manman also has a number of, we'll talk a little bit about her work, but she's produced films, a short documentary, including A Day with Xiaohui, which has been featured in multiple juried visual anthropology film festivals, including the Society for Visual Anthropology in 2019. She has established the Believing is Seeing Studios, which you'll see that you may have seen that on the advertisement here. So she has a professional studio in Guangzhou, and she engages in multiple forms of documentary filmmaking, different types of projects that we'll hear about. So what we're going to do, we're going to start here. I'll give you a quick introduction. Well, first, Manman, did you want to say anything now that we've introduced before we do the film?
Thank you. I think it was by coincidence to know Dr. Jacob, because I think we met in a seminar and I got his email because I noticed him because he asked a lot of questions just as me, you know. We are good question, and then we exchanged emails, and he never replied to my email. Like after 1 year, he suddenly wrote me an email to ask me whether I would be interested in his research topic, and because he was about to leave China by that time, and he wanted to use visual materials to maybe make a film and to reach a broader audience in the future. And by that time, I was really interested in ethnographic methods, like methodologies to combine with my filmmaking methods. So we talked and we did some research before we set out to the field work, and it was a very meaningful starting point for me, like to work with him for like almost 1 week. And we learned from each other a lot. At least he helped with my English, obviously. Yeah, okay. And I'm now based in Guangzhou, the southern one of the biggest city in the southern China. Yeah.
So, and I will say, so, transition here into introducing the film that we're going to watch. It was a learning experience. I think we both butted heads substantially because I have the inclination of an ethnographer, which is to not mess with what's going on, but as much as possible, observe and take it in. And Manman comes from the a high production quality film background where lighting really matters, angles really matter. When I film stuff as an ethnographer, typically I'm just trying to get in the most obscure corner and, not get in people's way. And so it was very interesting, I think, for both of us to think about the other virtues of the other discipline, right? High production quality versus ethnographic embeddedness and participant observation. And so that was as frustrating as it was, I think we really enjoyed learning from each other in that way, right?
Yeah, to be very frankly, we almost broke up our friendship, in that remote village. Anyway, let's talk about it later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just to very briefly introduce the film. So this is a 36-minute film entitled, we've called it Playing for the Ancestors. And basically this is based in field work that I was doing during that year in China while I was on a Fulbright fellowship. And Manman gave the background there. But just to give you a sense, we will, there's a brief tagline introducing the global Hmong diaspora. Well, this instrument, the Keng, you'll see it in subtitles and you'll hear it in passing in Hmong, but the way you pronounce that word, the Q-E-E-J, is Keng. So this instrument, the Keng, is probably the most iconic emblem of Hmong identity and Hmong culture and Hmong ritual across the broad Hmong diaspora that includes Hmong in Southwest China, Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, the United States, France, Australia, French Guiana, Argentina, even Germany and Canada as well. So across this broad global diaspora of Hmong people, this instrument is probably the one thing that really Hmong people would resonate with and point to as sort of iconic of their identity. And one of the reasons for that is because it's so central to Hmong cosmology and Hmong ritual practice. And that's really sort of the point we're trying to get across with the film. So Manman and I would like to make some real quick comments, and then we'll open up to a broader discussion. Feel free to the chat. Manman and I can read the chat. We haven't opened it up to everybody to direct chat, but feel free to pose questions there or digitally raise your hand, or even what would be even better is unmute yourself. But I guess I wanted to make a couple of quick notes and then let Mama make a couple of quick observations, and then we can open up to broader discussion. One thing I forgot to mention, some of you may have noticed, and I got a couple of text messages, some typos in the subtitles. We actually had a sort of epic technology fail. This is very much the cut that we wanted, but we were still tweaking the subtitles when we had a hard drive failure with the Final Cut project on it. So we're still tweaking the subtitles. And if any Hmong speakers in here, we're tweaking some of the translations too as well. But at any point, at any rate, I mean, one of the things that I just learned from Manman and her visual storytelling capabilities is it just enables a different type of ethnographic storytelling that is just not possible with words alone. And I think it's important to realize that there are things that are left to the imagination when you read an ethnographic article or monograph. And then there are things that are left to the imagination for visual media, right? So that cuts both ways. And one of the strengths of visual anthropology as a medium or as a mode of scholarship is that it provides a type of context that writing simply can't provide in its own. And I really love the way that Manman edited all this footage that we shot, focusing on the motorcycle sort of trying to get up the hill and really giving a context. And one of the things that's sort of implicit there is that Hmong as a transnational group, this community almost is sort of like a microcosm of that, right? Like it's right on the border. I mean, those where they're buying the hot dogs and the mushrooms and the grilled mushrooms and all that. I mean, that was literally 5 feet from the border, all that barbed wire fence. And so sort of setting that context and her visual storytelling capabilities and sense of visual narrative telling was really sort of like helped me think about new ways of producing ethnographic narratives. I also think that the audio immersion of this film is, frankly, it's reminiscent of sitting at a Hmong funeral, where you'll hear these gang songs and the beating of the drum literally for just hours and hours on end. And that's one thing that this film provides, that it's an experience that, you know, I can describe it in my writing as an ethnographer, and I do write about this a bit. But the film, sort of like these long drawn out songs, provides at least a brief experience of what that's like. Again, in a way, it affords a type of meaning making and conveying of sort of what it means, what it feels like, and what it means to sort of be embedded in this community in a way that writing can't accomplish on its own. Those are just a couple of quick notes. I'm quite interested in what people have to say. Manman, what did you want to say before we open it up more broadly? You're still muted. Okay. So let's do this. Oh, are you there? Manman, sorry, we still can't hear you. Is that just me, or can anybody else hear her?
Hello,
Yep,
can you hear me?
There you are. Yep.
Okay, so basically, can you show my face to the group? I think it's
yeah,
it's only
see it.
Can I, okay, yeah. So basically, I want to talk about like how we made this film, like how we got this idea, like because I studied film producing in Beijing Film Academy before, and it was my very first time to work with the anthropologist, and I think my role by that time was like an apprentice. Like I want to observe how you work, how you do your field work there, and also I was an observer in that field work site. Like I want to know how people there live, and I want to get the details. And do you remember, Jacob, like how we got this idea of making this film about the music instrument? Because for you, you study in rituals for many years, and I think ritual and religion belief it's a very deep topic for like the public, and we didn't get like a lot of money for like making this film in the very beginning, because we wanted to give a try, like to prove that whether our cooperation can get a like good results in the future. So we can only like have 1 week there, so we have limited shooting time there, and we so we have to find it like a topic which can be easier for the public to get the something about the religion belief for the Hmong community there. And for me, I always know this music instrument gan, like for most of Chinese people, because we know the Hmong is one of the 56 minority in China, and the gan is a very stereotype music instrument for them, like in their ceremony, in the festival. But after the conversation with you, I got the idea that we have a like kind of a wrong stereotype of the gan, because we only think that they need it like for music, for pleasure, for enjoy, for entertainment, but we don't know the meaning behind it. Like it's much more important than just a normal music instrument. So I think and I think music is music in the song like is more like a kind of shallow or a shallow topic for the audience public for the normal public to know, like to have emotional attachment to the religion belief to the cultures. So that's how we got the idea to make this film about the music instrument. Yeah. So can you share the slides? Yeah.
Yeah, so just one thing to add to that, and if there was one thing I suppose I'd want to strengthen a little bit, would be the narrative, where it makes it completely clear that these notes and playing the music through this instrument, it's not music. These are words. It's actually sort of like a spirit language, right? In other words, you couldn't learn to play the geng unless you actually knew how to speak Hmong, because you're actually speaking Hmong through the instrument, but it's speaking it to basically these ancestral spirits who sort of like receive that, and it enables their passageway to reincarnation and other things. We don't get deeply into the cosmology, but yeah. So let's do these slides real quick so we make sure we have time for Q&A
discussion. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Let's see. Which one did you want to talk about, or just?
Yeah, I think just go through. Yeah, because I wanted to. No, the first one. The first one. Yeah. So I think for visual anthropology, because I just studied my MA program last November in a German university, and so I'm a freshman and I'm just a beginner, so I cannot talk very deeply into that subject because I'm still learning. But I think the very important lesson I learned from like visual anthropology is like we wanted to make the invisible visible, and just as what Jacob stated before, like he think that visuals or medias can have like something that purely writing cannot reach. Yeah. So I think for me, it's my purpose, like going there, like making the film is to make something something invisible visible to the public. Yeah. And maybe after watching this film, you can notice that sound play a very important role in the narration of the whole film. Yeah. Go to next slides, please. And yeah, so basically, I think this is a rough introduction about the film. And yeah. And so I think the major message we want to convey by this story is like the last paragraph, where they're among, they are the GAN. So it's like if we wanted to talk about this film, that's the core idea. Yeah. Next one. Yeah. So I think this is like 3 chapters because it's about how I decided to edit the film, because you can see it's not like a feature documentary, like maybe you make a feature documentary for 1 year and you have a strong character, like a very complete storyline, but we don't have that kind of thing. So basically the first chapter is like to depict the living circumstances of the Hmong community there, and we found that the border market would be a very good place for that, because we can see like the people from Vietnam and from China, they all speak Hmong and they're all Hmong and they communicate in Hmong there. And yeah, we can see a lot of life details, and maybe you can pay attention to the motorcycle, because I just cannot ignore that motorcycle, because the Hmong people, like the local people, they use the very traditional basket for the daily life. But meanwhile, they rely heavily on the motorcycles because of the roads, because it's more convenient, because of the technology developed in the past decades. And the second chapter is about the making again details, because we think that it's very important to show how people make gains nowadays, although we cannot trace back to like how they make gains long time ago, but it's very important to tell people the details. And the chapter 3 is about the GAN songs, basically. Yeah, because as Jacob said, in the real funeral, you just keep listening to the GAN songs like for hours. And we try to record the full GAN song about the cow and how they explain the GAN songs in their own language, not in Mandarin, because most of the time when I watch documentary about Hmong, they always speak Mandarin. They don't use their own language. Yeah. Next one. Okay, so maybe I can read a question like, what kind of sounds impressed you after watching this film? Yeah, and what is the narration behind it? Or maybe you can just ask some other questions. Yeah, that's all.
All right, so Kif, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
You want to? I think it's more fun if people vocalize
Sure.
questions rather than me reading them. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm Kif Augustine Adams. I'm over at the law school. I also had a Fulbright in China 2013, 2014, but I was at Renmin University in Beijing. Is playing the, I'm going to say it wrong, Kong,
Gang.
gang is playing, is that a gendered activity? only men engage in it, only men can make it? And how does that tie in with the meaning of being Hmong if only men can participate in that particular activity?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question that I think it probably comes out implicitly that the answer might be yes to this question in the film. So as a descriptive matter, I've heard of women who learn to play the keng, but I've never actually met a woman who has learned that. So traditionally, from a descriptive standpoint, yes, it is a male activity. However, a lot of my ethnographic interviews, I've actually asked people about this, whether that's a matter of convention or a matter of necessity. And I can't say that no one has ever answered that it's a matter of necessity, but by and large, people are more just like, well, that's kind of the way it's part of our ritual division of labor. I mean, there are other elements to Hmong ritual practice. So, shamans, for example, maybe men, maybe women, for example. It depends who the shamanic spirits sort of like push to becoming a shaman and so on. It is one thing that people do talk about is they sort of expect that, particularly in the Hmong American community, that this will become more and more common. We have Yak Ying, one of our graduate students here. He may have had to leave to actually go teach his Hmong class. Yak Ying, you're not still here, are you? I don't see you anywhere. He might have had some insight, but one of the things that people talk about is that, oh yes, young Hmong women are starting to learn it, because there's no ritual or cosmological reason for women not to do it. It's just that it's always been sort of a male dominated activity. And so there's kind of an expectation, and people talk about stories about, oh yeah, this young Hmong woman in California is becoming quite the gang master and so on, right? So people sort of expect that that it will become, less, at least uniformly male as a practice, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Momoka, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I had a question. So in chapter 1, I think the border market, they showed like people walking through the fields, and they seem to have like colorful clothing and headdresses. And then I saw at the end where I forgot what his name was, but when the king player was playing his instrument, there was like a ribbon with like tassels, and that seemed really colorful. And I was wondering what colors meant in their culture.
Yeah, so the color schemes really do match. Hmong clothing varies quite a bit across these communities. So, some Hmong Americans might actually watch this film and without knowing that they're Hmong might not realize that they're Hmong. I mean, there's sort of like, there's a lot of similarities, but there are also a lot of differences between patterns of traditional Hmong clothing in this community and other communities. But those decorative strings that are often part of the strap, basically, that you hang the thing on the wall with, they tend to map on the same types of textile patterns you'll see in traditional embroidery and so on. We could have a long conversation about the meanings of those embroidery patterns and so on. In 5 seconds, there's one version of that believes that the lost Hmong writing system is actually encoded into the embroidery patterns. And there's a movement to try and recover that writing system from the embroidery itself. So there's, suffice it to say that embroidery and textiles are loaded with meaning in Hmong society. And that could be people write dissertations about that sort of thing. So. Any critical comments or thoughts, response to Manman's questions? Zach, go ahead.
That was really outstanding, you guys. That's terrific. Really nice work. Makes you feel like you want to start trying to document your own field work in recording. That's terrific. These are questions that I've had about. I remember first hearing about the gang like in BA theses when I first got here, and just a couple of general questions. So I've always understood this idea or this fact that it's Hmong, the language. How does that square Is there anybody that weighs in on like phonetically, is there any kind of like any idea at all in terms of, like a translation or a conversion? Or is it like, we could send a code to somebody with notes that spelled out things within a limited range of letters, A through G, or, you know what I mean? And then he says to help the ancestor get where it needs to go. How uniform is that idea of where it needs to go? Is there specifically a heaven, as it were, or is it just wherever it needs to go?
So in terms of the note structure and it as a language, it actually is quite literal. That's not just a symbolic, like, we might say that, a Bach symphony has so much meaning, but it's sort of like ephemeral meaning. It's not the same, right? Like there's actual lexical lexical distinctions and denotational content being played through the instrument itself. Now the difference is that there's many more homonyms when you play the qeng, because you don't have as many phonemic distinctions that you can make when you have 6 reeds and various combinations, and high, going from low to high and low to and high to low and so on. So there are a lot more homonyms in the sort of like way that Hmong gets translated to playing it through the instrument, but nevertheless it is like straight up Hmong language directed to the spirits, right? And one of the things that it does is, Yang, who's one of our master students, I think he's left now, but the way he would describe it is to say that if you were to sing the song, if you were to sing the song to the spirits, there's 2 things here. One is that's more like giving them directions, and they could follow them directions and get to the ancestral village themselves, right? And then the other problem is that some of the other malevolent spirits around might actually hear those directions themselves and be able to sort of like, steal those directions and maybe, prohibit the person from getting to the end. Or actually a better example would be to get to make it back to the spiritual bureaucracy that monitors who gets reincarnated and when, right? Whereas if you play it through the qeng, there's actually a ritual at the beginning of the funeral that teaches the person who's passed away the code or the language as spoken through the qeng. So it's kind of like a code language. That's one quality of it. And then the second quality of it is that it's more than just giving them directions. It's like putting them on the plane that sends them there, right? So for one of the spirits, and this is the complicated thing, is that in Hmong cosmology, a person has more than one spirit. There's a spirit that goes to the ancestral village, there's a spirit that gets reincarnated, and then there's a spirit that goes to the grave and then eventually becomes a protector spirit for the descendants, right? But that spirit in particular, the one that gets reincarnated, if it's not played, if the qeng isn't played for that person, then it's possible that they might not actually make it to reincarnation, which is going to lead to problems, spiritual, physical, health-oriented, and economic problems for the descendants of of that person, right? So it actually has a direct effect on what actually happens to spirits, as opposed to just telling them how to get there. It actually sends them there, if that makes sense. But it is an actual, like, it's not symbolically linguistic, it is like lexical denotational content. And these are the types of nuances that, frankly, I mean, Manman, I don't know what you think about this, but these are the types of things where I think, those details would be very hard to capture even in an interview, because it gets a little nuanced and a little difficult. But this is one of those instances where I feel like, the genre of writing might actually shine more in providing that type of ethnographic nuance, and pairing that with something like a film like this that can sort of immerse you in the context and really give you a sense of the meaning and the value of it.
Like a book with a DVD that came with it or something would be dynamite.
Yeah, there's a great ethnography, Holy Hustlers, that is Jacob, have you read that?
I know of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, so I actually like it comes with a DVD, and I like the DVD almost better than the book because of exactly what you're saying, Jacob, that it gives you a sense of what it's like to be. So in this case, it's like a trance state, and it gives you a much more kind of embodied understanding of what it's like to be an audience member, and even in some instances, some cuts, like even a participant. And you know, that's just something you lose in writing. But also, if there was no writing, then you would get really confused in the course of the documentary as well. So
yeah. Aileen, are you here?
I am. Hi.
Is it fair to ask you to again, I think it's better to have you pose your question rather than us vocalizing. Is that okay?
Sure. I'll turn my camera on.
Good to see you, by the way.
Hi, everyone. I posed this question in the chat, which I guess, yeah, is only available to you, Jacob. I'm wondering how you both, as an anthropologist and a filmmaker, also taking into consideration your positions, right, thought critically about the voyeuristic gaze that is intrinsic to this type of film, and also, I guess, visual anthropology, which I don't know too much about. I was especially struck by the difference between the film and then those like almost private, like personal footage, Jacob, that you might have taken throughout the years. And the stark difference between those two, one sort of very clearly being in the space, right? And like being shot, I guess professionally. And then yours, right, which are very much of the person on the outside, like clearly showing that you are not in these, like in the action.
Yeah, so let me give one quick perspective, and I'm interested in Manman's perspective as well. Manman, I hope you're there. Your thing seems, oh, there you are. Okay, it looked like your picture had frozen. This is a fantastic question. I mean, so and the juxtaposition is a fantastic one to point out, because that footage at the end, again, I'm always sort of like, I always had permission from the family and everybody to film, and in many cases they want that footage themselves for their own family records and so on. But I'm sort of like setting up in a dark corner, right? And trying to be out of the way. And one of the things that struck me and frankly made me uncomfortable as an ethnographer working with Manman was the way that in many cases we had to really just sort of, for lack of a better term, get right up in people's faces. And I guess one of the other things that surprised me was how unproblematic that seemed to be to the people. So we would spend the time, there was a lot of, background stuff. Now I'd been doing field work in this community, and most of the people in the film were people that I knew to varying degrees, and sort of like, hey, yeah. And many of them actually became invested themselves in the product because the symbolic importance of the thing to them, for Qing masters in particular. And so one of the things that I guess surprised me was, there was the guy in his house where he's playing the Jacquin Tonyu in the dark house. I mean, we sat there for 45 minutes while Manman was setting up lighting and so on, because it was a very difficult spot to film in. And I was just getting really sort of like worried that we were just like being really obtrusive and so on. But I think, gosh, there's so much in your question, Aileen, but I feel like I feel like there's two dimensions to this. One would be sort of that interpersonal dimension, which I've kind of commented on, and the broader notion of like the voyeuristic gaze. I think that is sort of a two-edged sword, right? On the one hand, there is sort of like, absolutely, and there's a whole literature on the ethnographic gaze and so on, right? So on the one hand, there's sort of like an immersion, particularly like in chapter 1, those sort of scene setting, context setting shots, and even some of those in the shop itself while he's making the thing and so on. On the one hand, there's sort of like a gaze quality to that, but there's also sort of like a context setting quality to it. And frankly, it was something that I struggled with in the moments when we were shooting it. Again, sort of like being up in people's faces, but having seen what I sort of trusted that Manman had her reasons. And there were multiple instances I remember where I thought, this is over the line, this is not going to be cool. And basically people were just like, yeah, you're making your film. I get it. Like, whatever, like, do what you need to do. I'm just going to sit here making a gang or playing a song. I don't know. What's your take there, Manman? You're still muted.
You can hear me?
Yeah,
No?
you are.
Okay, so I think that's the most impressive thing that we had during our collaboration in Yunnan, because I think you as an anthropologist, you're very cautious, like, to deal with the relationship with your like protagonist. And for me, because by that time I was always trying to use my mindset as a film production as a film producer, something like that. Because I like, as you said, the anthropographic gaze, because maybe for me, I use my camera, I use my lens to gaze, not my eyes. So that's why I was trying to find something that's maybe important for the story, for the film. And I kind of lose, like, the patience, like, for dealing with people, like, to explain carefully, to pay attention to their what they care, what they don't want to show, or maybe something like that. But you played a perfect role in that part. Yeah. So that's the meaning, or that's the the key point.
In many ways, I felt like myself, like I was doing damage control with my own social relationships on the one hand, and Manman on the other hand, saying we need to get in there and film this and so on. So that was very much a negotiation, and it was a very uncomfortable one. I think we were when we parted ways at the end of that week, to you to go to Guangzhou, me to go back to to Kunming, I think we were happy to be away from each other, to have that break, because there was so much headbutting in that moment. But at the same time, like, I guess reflecting back, going back to Aileen's question, I see the value in what was, because at the end of the day, these key figures and the people in the interviewees in the film, the gang maker and so on, they were quite invested in this being something that looked good and that was sort of like could convey that meaning to the global Hmong community. And I guess one more thing real quick is that, and maybe I'm reading too much into your question, Aileen, but I feel like there's sort of like a critique of maybe a romantic view of Hmong culture in the sort of voyeuristic gaze. And I think that's absolutely a fair critique. But I also think that there's an extent to which, and including in this community themselves, and I think some of this came out in the final narrative towards the end, that there's sort of like a self-romanticism, right? A romanticism of some of these practitioners themselves about their own culture, their history, the topography, and things of that sort. And I guess to some extent, I think we wanted to capture that, right? And to portray some sense of what that's like, what that sort of like self-reflexive romantic view of some of our ethnographic interlocutors actually, what that perspective entails. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about that, Aileen, or. So we are at 5:22. So I'm going to give permission to anybody who wants to sign off, but we're also happy to take a couple more questions or comments. There is, I will say this, we didn't have time to do the second short film. Is it okay if I post the link in there, Manman, and people can sort of watch it individually?
Yeah, it's okay, because that's part of the visual anthropology research project I'm carrying out in Guangzhou. It's about the urban village, which is a very special phenomenon in China because of urbanization. And that film, the film Jacob just shared with you, is a video I made recently during the Spring Festival in China. And yeah, that's a video like to introduce the project. Yeah, maybe if you would be interested, you can just watch it. And I think I will keep updated of the whole project online in the next like 1 year. Yeah. And I'm happy or open to have more like suggestion, or someone who wants to, who is interested in this topic, like urban village, migrant workers, population, like floating population, something like that. Yeah. You can just email me. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, do you want to post your email in the chat there?
Yeah.
And people
Can
can
you
contact
oh
you.
yeah, I can type. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Wait a moment.
Chong, are you still here?
I am.
So would you like to read your question? Would you like me to read it?
I guess I could read it because, you know, I'm here and I'm speaking.
Very good.
I guess I could show my video too, although I don't know what I'll look like. Hi, Professor Hickman, and thank you, Manman, for the film. So I had a question and I'll pose it. So my question is sort of, I wondered if you two had thought about sort of giving some kind of a warning about the funeral scenes, sort of just as the content itself, given that neither of you are Hmong, nor are you practicing animist, or not that, you know, I know or any of the audience knows. And I only say this as a Hmong person who is also an animist, that hearing the funeral playing songs and the drum sounds and the nya, or sort of the people mourning, right, the crying, like that was sort of unsettling spiritually, right? Like I wasn't prepared for that, because that's a very sort of specific context in which I would hear all of those three things sort of, you know, intertwine within each other, right? And I think this might be sort of a bigger question about if you two had shown the cut of the film to other sort of other Hmong folks, or if you have other Hmong folks, you know, give their input into the film, as well as you were sort of filming, and then also as you're editing, and then, you know, I think you two had talked about that this isn't quite the final cut, and so if you were going to incorporate sort of, you know, other Hmong folks' input into the film as you finalize it. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think both of you probably know Yakeng Va, right? Like, so he's doing a master's degree here, and he's seen it multiple times. And in fact, we were doing a more nuanced translation of the Hmong stuff when we had the epic hard drive fail and lost the final cut project, which Manman's been rebuilding. But yeah, so I've actually had extensive discussions about this. And in you know, from all the people that I've talked to, ritual practitioners and others, the nya, or the sort of the funeral crying or wailing, is clearly the most potentially sensitive. The consensus has not consensus, but you know, in these detailed discussions that I've had with Yeking and others, has been that the sort of used for an educate. So there's two things going on here. It would be potentially spiritually problematic to play those recordings in a Hmong home, you know, with a saka that could potentially offend the dakwa of that family. And I guess if I'm completely honest, I hadn't thought through the implications of doing this over Zoom, of that particular element of doing it over Zoom. Because people are in fact in their own homes, and so that's frankly something I should have thought through more. But in a broader sense, and I feel like, I mean, this is actually an interesting question. I'd be interested in your take on. You know, there could be something of a sort of, I suppose, you know, spiritual trigger warning at the beginning of the film or at some point to cue that might be the case, or actually what I would prefer that we do is probably switch the footage that we use at the end there, so there is no nya in the actual footage itself. In terms of the king songs and the drums, in all of the discussions I've had with ritual practitioners, none of that. The only thing that has been ever described to me, and I've had multiple conversations about this with people, that would be potentially spiritually problematic would be the actual nya itself, not the Keng songs, including the Jakeng To Nyu or the Jakeng Tu Shia. All of those ritual practitioners have said, no, if it's a video for educational purposes, there's no spiritually problematic elements to that at all, or actually, in fact, the drum playing. So I have had these conversations, and I think, you know, reflecting on that, you know, the fact that some of you could have tuned in from home with the saka where that could potentially offend the decor of your home, that is particularly problematic. And I'll just be honest, I hadn't thought through the affordance of doing this over Zoom where people actually would be watching this in their homes. But those same practitioners would say that that wouldn't be problematic to do, say, in a cinema, for example, right? So, Mao, would you like to make your comment? You just posted something in the chat, and I apologize. I struggled with whether or not to make the chat public or private, and you know, we've had enough awkward moments in these large venues where I decided that I didn't want to leave it open to people posting whatever in the chat for others to see. But Mao Lee, are you there?
Yes, I'm still here. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you can hear me, but I'm
Yes,
using my
hear
phone
you.
to call in, so it's limited in the functions that I can use. I guess my question is kind of related to the previous question that you just answered. I am wondering if you could speak more to your decisions of filming the funeral, because I know that, and I'm also a Hmong person myself too, animist as well. And I know that in general, Hmong people do not film, you know, like those who pass away, you know, the picture of the dead bodies or funerals and such. And I'm just wondering if you could speak more to your decisions of filming that, please.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something I take quite seriously, and I'll tell you, I've never filmed anything at a funeral, or actually anything anywhere. You know, Waneng, a shaman ritual, or Hupli, or anything. I mean, anytime I film anything, it's you know, I make sure there's complete, not just consent, but approval and understanding of what I'm doing, and as an anthropologist, and what my purposes are, what my ultimate aims, what I'm trying to do in the long run, and so on. And so I've never filmed any ritual practice at all without both the ritual practitioners and typically the home, you know, whoever's home it's in, if it's in a home, and also typically like the gasu at a funeral. So I would make sure all of those people sort of understand who I am, what I'm doing. And in many of these cases, actually, these are, you know, close friends that I'm working with, people that I've known for, in some cases, a decade, right? And so I would say that actually, I've most of the funerals I've been to where I've been filming, because of the, you know, prolific nature of filming devices, I see Hmong people filming funerals all the time. But but for me personally, I never film anything without very explicit permission from, you know, all of the family members involved, representatives from the family, and ritual practitioners, and all of that. You know, I think there's a lot of variation in the Hmong community about these types of things, and about, you know, whether it would be appropriate to film a body in a funeral or not. And I've been actually more cautious, I've found, than what people would say, oh, you need to get this shot and you need to get this view over here because this is really important. I've actually been almost like coerced into filming things that I at least thought would be, you know, perhaps inappropriate or whatnot, by the people who are, you know, actually, once again, invested in sort of documenting things. And oftentimes they want a copy of those recordings for themselves, as sort of like an archive of Hmong ritual practice. And so I take that quite seriously. And I'm always, like I say, you know, deeply conscientious about not just getting consent, but, you know, full permission, and, you know, making sure that that's an informed level of mutual understanding about what I'm doing, my plans for the footage, and so on. We could take, I think we've exhausted the, let's see, Chong said, yes, that makes sense. The other thing I'll add is that even if people aren't tuning in from home where the saka is, there is still the idea that spirits reside within the body, and they're always with the person. And that's a fair point. And I think this is one of those things that really sort of like hinges on the various understandings of Hmong cosmology, right? So I suppose, and maybe this is a fault, but I tend to privilege either those people that I know well or some of the ritual experts. And the one thing that's sort of like consistent among ritual practitioners themselves is that the direct offense to the Nya would be to the Saka itself in people's homes. But at the same time, and I write about this as an anthropologist, there's the sort of official doctrinal version that's, sometimes held, but also variable amongst practitioners. And then there's the extensive variation among the broader Hmong community and how they interpret things. And that's one of the, that's one of the sort of like, facts of nature in Hmong community and in these various Hmong communities and the way they undertake ritual practice and so on. So I think that more or less, unless I've missed something, expends what was in the chat. Any other comments, or Manman, do you want to say anything else before we sign off here?
I think thank you for watching this film and join the discussion. Yeah, I think it's been still a long way for us to go in this way. Yeah. So we're open to to any suggestion, and maybe if you have any topics related to China, you have fieldwork here, welcome to contact with me. Yeah, that's advertisement. Yeah.
I've put my email in the chat there as well, if any of you are interested in contacting me. These are fantastic questions, important critiques.
One sec.
Oh, sorry, my Siri's going off here. These are fantastic questions, important critiques. And in fact, I'm gonna save the chat here as sort of like a to-do list of things for us to think about moving forward, Manman, and as we develop this cut and tweak it and so on. But thank you all for joining us. We hope you've appreciated it. Feel free to reach out. We really thank you all for taking the time to take in this film and discuss it with us. 我叫你啊。